So a little bit about me before we get cracking. My role at Google is quite unique. It's a 12-month fellowship with a very clear goal. My role is to help local, regional, and small publishers build stronger news businesses through training and support. The support takes the shape of office hours, which I've launched in the last couple of weeks, which is basically a 30-minute consulting session, which has been quite popular. So if you're very interested in that, let me know, and I'll happily set up some time to talk through whatever you need. So I got my first experience in journalism at my local newspaper, the Lithgow Mercury, age 15. And the first 2 years of my career was spent serving local communities as a reporter. I most recently led News Corp's shift to digital by building a national training program for newsrooms. I trained over 1,000 journalists in social media, search, mobile, and video. And even David Van Coller, who's now at Google, who's in the chat at the moment, was one of our trainers in that program. And also Rema, who's on the call today, was one of our trainers. So an amazing experience there. Also taught journalists and editors how to maximize readership and revenue, which is kind of the core, I guess, of this current role. Also launched social news startup Storeful in Australia. I promise this is not going to all be about me. We're going to get into you in a second. Storeful was a first of its kind service providing publishers and brands with social media content to use in their storytelling. I was also head of social media at the ABC, leading the business through a period of fairly dramatic change. And I'm currently lecturing at UTS, and judging by that, I'm a little bit tired. I also have a cattle farm in country New South Wales and a 9-month-old daughter named Molly, but don't get me started on either of those two things or we won't have much time for anything else. As I mentioned, we also have that new Q&A feature happening in Google Meet where you can ask questions. You can also upvote your favorites, and I'll draw from the most popular at the Q&A session at the end. You'll also get access to this recording and the slides after the session, and a short survey will hit your inbox towards the end. Your feedback helps us improve and also allows us to continue to make the case for this kind of work. All right, let's rip in. End of the public service announcements. So one of the fundamental differences between print and digital publishing is a deeper understanding of who your audience is in digital and how they behave. Imagine that you could stand over the shoulder of your readers as they flip through, the newspaper, watching how much time they spend on every page, every story, every picture, every ad. I would have loved this stuff when I started off in newspapers. Analytics allows you to do that on the web, and we're going to take you through that stuff today. What this means for you guys as journalists, publishers, product and salespeople is that it allows you to use the data to create more engaging stories, build better digital products, and tell more compelling stories to advertisers, to make them spend more money. And that's the goal here, to build a better business through data, and this starts and ends with the audience. When I was at Storeful, I had one goal, which was to increase the number of journalists using our newswire. I thought that if I could increase the number of users, I'd deepen the engagement with our business and success would flow from there. And fortunately it did. We doubled the amount of Australian users in the first 90 days, which started a process that led to us posting $1 million of revenue in our first year. Justin, who is the Director of Education at Google and a certified data nerd, also looks quite good in a leather jacket, looks at analytics like this. The only goal of web analytics is to increase our business outcomes. Before we go any further, I want you all to write down one goal or target for the next 12 months. Don't necessarily think about it from your patch. Look at it as for the business as a whole. One goal, it must be measurable. Go. So Justin goes on to say, web analytics helps us understand our audience and their needs and helps us make better online experiences for them. Now, depending on what you wrote down, that might mean that you want to drive more subscriptions, and analytics will enable us to focus on what will make them subscribe. This is increasingly where publishers are going, and there's a lot of research to support an increasing willingness for people to pay, which is really, really good news. Now, this is more than just getting people to click. It's about getting them to hand over their money, which is a whole different ballgame. So we need to be incredibly attuned to where they see value in what you do. So there are a bunch of different analytics services and providers out there that you can use. I'm going to talk to Google Analytics, obviously, because Google is paying my bills, but also because it's just a really simple one, and it's the one that I know. But there are alternatives. So we will just basically talk about the general theory, but we'll use Google Analytics as the mechanism for that. So basically, in simple words, Google Analytics is a free tracking tool that allows you to understand how visitors use your website. So let's just say that you're an e-commerce store and you want to know how many users visit your website. With Google Analytics, you can see the number of visitors to your online store, where they are coming from, which device they are using, and much more. This is a typical view of the Google Analytics dashboard. You can see there that you can see total sessions, how many pages per session, how many of these were new sessions, so people coming to your website for the first time, the average session duration, and the total number of users and page views. It's a lot of information. You can also see how many of these users are new versus returning. New users are important, but I know from my time at News Corp that returning visitors are the most valuable. They stay longer on average and are more likely to engage with other products and services. Remo, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that. The much demonized bounce rate is also worth clarifying as well at this point. It's the percentage of single session visits. This could flag a few things. It might mean that they were able to find what they needed right away, which is a good thing. So it's important to kind of understand and interpret that, that data point correctly. It could also mean that the website's not functioning as it should. So it is a really important indicator. I'll provide a handout at the end of this also, which basically summarizes all these terms. So don't feel like you need to furiously write all this stuff down. I'll provide a glossary, at the end of this, this discussion. Google Analytics can also tell you more specific things about your users. This is Peter. Peter has a wonderful beard. If you're tracking Peter in Google Analytics, you won't know his name, but you can tell what device he used to access your site. You can also see what Peter clicked on to come to your site. For example, Peter came through Facebook. As I mentioned, analytics won't give you personally identifiable information. You can't learn specifically who is coming to your site, but you can get aggregated and anomalized information like demographics, age, location, that sort of thing. One example of how we used this when I was at the ABC was in prioritizing the rollout of mobile optimized pages. We saw that around 30% of visitors to our news pages were coming from mobile devices, despite the fact that the experience was awful. We used this data to roll out changes to the ABC News websites first, serving this patient and persistent audience and simplifying our work schedule. So there are a myriad of ways that you can use Google Analytics to kind of help you with your work. GA also gives you real-time information on when visitors are on your site. You can look at things like time of day, days of week, seasonality, like Anzac Day, public holidays, Christmas Day, all the days. You could use this data on Christmas Day, for example, to decide what rostering is required if you're a news editor. If you have little to no traffic after 2 p.m., you might roster your web editor to go home at 2 to enjoy a late lunch with their family. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the tool, as you can understand when your audience is consuming your content across the day. This is the kind of data that you can use to make changes to when staff start the day, when you roll over various parts of the website, and maybe when/how you promote your stories. For example, if your audience rushes to your website first thing in the morning, a midnight rollover of yesterday's news won't cut it. You might start a senior journalist on the first shift of the web team at 5 a.m. so that the website is fresh and up to date for that 6 a.m. brush. This also gives your print product a kick if you've got a print product as well, as you're well on top of the news when the rest of the team logs on for the day. Look, I'm happy to pause there and take a question if anybody has one, or we can keep rocking and rolling and do all the Q&A at the end. No questions? Awesome. Everyone's still awake. As I mentioned, you can also find out where they're coming from. We're doing a little bit of work with a small independent paper called the Narendra Argus at the moment, and we found out that they had a very small number of readers from Colombia, which we're still trying to work out what that means, but it's wonderful to see that they're so well read across the world. So there's some really, really deep sort of geographic information as well that's available within Google Analytics, and as I mentioned, other analytics platforms if you're using them. I'm conscious that this might already be information overload, so just as a reminder that I'll have notes for you at the end that you can sort of read back over. I'll give you full access to this deck, and I'll also give you this video as well, so you'll have all of those resources to look back on. This is the final thing I want to tell you about numbers, which we all know that most journalists aren't great with numbers. GA also allows you to answer these kinds of questions. What do they click on? Where do they come from? What are they doing when they arrive? And how long are they staying? And importantly also, where do they go next? So it's a really amazing set for you to sort of understand. It gives you that full sort of journey. And this also helps us understand what they're doing on your site. So you can start to learn things like which article thumbnails are generating the most clicks, what style of imagery is resonating with different types of demographics, which headlines increase your click-through rate. All of that stuff is available to you. So in tech jargon, we'd say this organization has really succeeded in targeting me as an archetypal visitor to their website. Translated, it just means this. These people understand me. But I think it's also important to understand the difference between data and insights. This will help you sort of immeasurably as you're starting to work through analytics, either as a first-time user or as somebody that's been using it for a little while. Basically, data is the useful bit of new information, and the insight is how you can act on it. So the data, again, is the new information, and the insight is how you can act on it. And I think people don't really think enough about that. Often we just get bombarded with data. There's so much information out there, but it's really, really important to understand what the information is telling you and what it can lead you to do. Here's an example that they use at Google. Which is not appearing on my slides, so we'll just move on. So look, it was a weird one anyway, so we won't bother. Look, there's a bunch of new tools that are available at the moment that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking you guys through. These tools are basically red hot tools. They've just been released in the last couple of weeks, so they're brand new. Most people wouldn't have seen them yet. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking through these tools. And then I really do want to leave some time at the end as well to allow you guys to ask as many questions as you want. So we'll get into these tools now, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So Google has created free news industry tools to help make basically data-driven business decisions and editorial decisions, if I might say that. News consumer insights is one, and real-time content insights have basically been kind of quiet heroes in newsrooms for a while. They've been re-released in the past few weeks with a new resource, which is called the News Tagging Guide, and I'll take you through what each of those means. So Consumer Insights gives publishers recommendations on how to grow reader engagement and reader revenue. Content Insights helps you understand how your content is performing in real time, and also what topics are trending on the web, so you don't miss a thing. News Consumer Insights also has a feature that I love that allows you to turn this data into a dashboard that displays on a screen in your newsroom. So basically with Content Insights, News Consumer Insights, all the insights, you can turn it into a visual dashboard that you can have on a screen in your newsroom so that you can see content that is trending on your website in real time and how engagement's going for you in real time, but also importantly, that other part, so how things are trending on the web and what content has been circulated on the web. An exciting new part of this is also the news tagging tool, which is a new addition to the family. It's a diagnostic tool that allows you to identify the audience metrics that you need to capture. Just quite simply, News Tagging Guide basically kind of runs a script over your website and lets you know things like how different parts are performing, how different content's performing, whether you should put different tags on, whether people are clicking on the subscribe link to your newsletter. It's a really, really powerful kind of diagnostic tool. So here they are. So, sorry guys. So I recommend that you play around with them all as it's designed to work together. However, I wanted to quickly sorry guys. I was going to do a live demo there, but as it's always the way, you should never try and do live demos. So that's a hot tip from me. I never do live demos, and I went, you know what, today I'm feeling it. I'm going to do a live demo. The live demo hasn't worked, so I'm not going to do a live demo. But basically, those tools are designed to work together. As you can see back there, that's the website to check them out. So goo.gle/datatools. That's the website, the short link that gets you access to those 3 new tools. Have a play with them. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on email. I'm really happy to answer any questions you have, or to also set up a video session like this, and we can kind of step through that stuff. So I just want to very quickly recap on the things that we've covered in this session. It's been a bit of a lightning session. I have kind of smashed through a fair bit of information. So I do want to just recap very briefly, and then we'll have a chance to have a bit of a Q&A as well. So basically, it's all about the audience. The audience is our central focus, and success grows from how well we serve them. That's how I like to think about it. Analytics helps us to understand our audience and their needs. This allows us to serve them better. Data is information. Insights are information that you can act on. And also, just adding to that, never do live demos. Never do live demos. So that's also something that we learned today. Never. Okay, so here's Tom Hanks from the hit film Big. Amazing film. But also there's my email address, neilvarco@google.com. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about today's session. And also feel free to follow me on social media. So I'm @NeilWrites on Twitter, also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. We also have the news training website, which I've just flashed up there again for you, g.co/news training. That's where you can get on-demand training on a variety of different things, from verification to advanced search to how to find data sources on the internet. So it's an amazing resource. Do check it out. Also, thank you, Miguel, for moderating this discussion. I think he's got his hand in his mouth, the stress of it all. Miguel is available to do these sorts of sessions. I might even just bring Miguel in for a moment, actually, because, you know, he's a legend. Miguel, do you want to just tell everybody a little bit about what you're up to and I guess, you know, the different sort of programs that you're rolling out right now?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And thanks for the opportunity, actually, because I just realized there's some people here from some pretty cool publishers. I've been Googling all of you while while waiting for your questions. No, I've been running training, all of it by Hangout, obviously during the quarantine period, for newsrooms, journalists, uni classes and stuff like that, covering all of the fundamentals: Google search, verification, maps, visualization, satellite stuff, and also moving to sort of fairly advanced sort of open source investigation and verification tools, things like that. So, and I've been doing it since sort of March this year. Yeah, it's been a hell of a lot of fun and a good opportunity to work with lots of people. I see a couple of people here from the conversation who, if I'd love to chat to you guys afterwards if you like. Can I borrow your email off Neil after this?
Yeah, for sure. That sounds great.
Thanks a lot. Because yeah, no, that'd be really good. And now that I finally understand about analytics as well, after having sat through this, we can all be on the same page on that one, at least. And so you'll be one group I don't need to ask. I don't need to fudge my answers about analytics for. But yeah, so that'd be cool, actually. And yeah, if anybody else is actually here who from and you would like me to work with your newsroom journalists, I'd be more than happy to. And yeah, and we kind of work in tandem in that way. So I'm always asking to be invited to Neil's parties. So yeah, thanks a lot, Neil.
Alcohol and gluten-free now, Miguel, so not as much fun as they used to be. Thank you, mate. So we've got a bit of time. Does anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask, or sort of anything at all? Talk about gluten? I'm here. I've got another 30 minutes.
I think Andrew's got a question.
Andrew.
Me? Yeah?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is more of a question out of curiosity than anything. So I haven't actually seen the insights tool, the real-time content insights tool. I'm just thinking, if we have a dashboard that displays the best performing topics at any given time, would this eventually lead to a situation where journalists are always writing about the best performing topic and give us a false indication of what audiences actually?
Mate, that is such a good question. It absolutely can. And I think it's why this stuff is really, really important, because it might show you something you don't know. So just to use an example from News Corp, we found with the in-house analytics tool that we were getting lots of subscriptions with stories that we're doing around council down in South Australia. So it's just a really deep interest in council stories. Every time there was a development story in particular, we would get a subscription. And they weren't high view stories, so they weren't really hitting us on the radar anywhere else. But we've sort of seen the subscriptions come through. So in the end, we were able to basically dedicate a resource to covering development applications. So there became a journalist that covered that round. So it can sort of show you things that maybe you don't know, but you're 100% right. If you only follow the data, then you're really limiting yourself in terms of, you're not covering the whole story.
I think journalism is one of those things where sometimes you need to kind of pique people's interest, and then they don't really know what they want to know about. You know what I mean? Like, some audiences don't really know they're interested in something until they're exposed to it in some way, and then they kind of dig into it a bit further. And I feel like this tool might have a blind spot there, but I'm just glad to hear that it's been considered.
Yeah, look, I think that's really good feedback, and I think that's why we try and put your content with content from the rest of the web as well, so that you're not just seeing a very narrow view of what's happening on your website. You're also seeing how content is performing across the rest of the internet. So you're sort of hopefully getting a view of your world, and also, I guess, what the opportunities are outside of that.
Yep. Cool, thanks.
Awesome, great question. Any other questions?
Oh, Neil, it's David here. How are you?
Hey, mate.
I was just wondering can you just give me a quick overview? If I'm setting up a website and I'm not looking for it's more a sort of a personal work related one. I'm not looking for thousands of subscribers or clicks or revenue, but it's more, I guess it's virtually a website that might be the equivalent of a LinkedIn page. So I'm sort of looking for quality rather than quantity, so to speak. So what, in just generally speaking, what can analytics do for me in that regard?
Look, I'll tell you what I did. Well, I built my own little personal website, neilwrights.com, David, if you want to check it out. I built that a little while ago, and it's got a really good, it's built on Squarespace, which is not a Google product at all. And if there's a better product out there, I'm always happy to recommend them, but it's built on Squarespace. And Squarespace has a really great analytics platform at the back end. So it basically kind of tells me how many people are on my website, which at the start was nobody. So kind of what I did was to make sure that my website was appearing high in search results, which is kind of what you want. When someone searches David Clark, researcher, they're looking for you. We want to make sure that they're finding your website first. So I then ran a Google ad campaign to try and drive traffic to that website. So then Google was basically sending a signal to Google that this is an important website and it should be indexed higher in search. And at the time, Google, and does this from time to time, offers free AdWords as well, so you can run an ad campaign and get more hits on that website. But we could probably have a chat about that over that coffee that I owe you, and work out how to do that specifically. But yeah, I guess, look, in terms of the analytics, it gives you an indication of where people are coming from, whether it's Squarespace Analytics or Google Analytics. You can start to taper content to that. So if you're seeing, say, for instance, ahead of the next Olympic Games, that you're getting a lot of traffic coming from Japan, then you might pull out a dedicated page on the Olympic Games. You might have links to all your resources and your research there. It just kind of gives you a bit of an indication of what's important, so that you can surface it more easily, I think.
Okay. No, that's good. No, and we'll do that. We'll do that coffee.
Yeah, even virtually. I'm up for it. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Neil, you've got a question from Carlson Smith. If you want to have either a look at the chat or in the question section.
I can do that for sure. Okay, so in your experience, is it more common to see stories with lots of page views also generate lots of subscriptions? Or are those too far apart? i.e., highest page view stories for the day have very little subscriptions, but high subscription stories have low page views. Oh, that's a great question. I feel like putting Rama on the spot here, if he's willing to speak up. So Rama, if not, just ignore me. But Rama is the head of SEO at the Oz, and is an absolute expert in this area. Rama, if you're willing to share, do you see that there's kind of like a correlation between stories that are getting very high page views and those that are generating subscriptions, or is sometimes they're kind of like they're not necessarily linked?
From my experience, like they're not necessarily linked, and it all depends on the intent. If, for instance, let's say there is a story about the Donald Trump first debate that did happen. Obviously, the volume is huge. Intent is not to become a subscriber. They're just like keen to know what's happened in the debate. At the same time, if there is another story from the Australian that we had, the Night Rider stories, there the search volume is like very minimal, but the intent is like curious. Like people are really curious to know want to know what happened, so they want to subscribe. So, for instance, this morning we had this story about the Rabbitohs thing, the drug stuff. People are really keen to know what happened to that, and the volumes are very low. But we did get like 60 subscribers just this morning in the first 4 hours. So there is absolutely no correlation, and my only takeaway here is from experience is intent.
Hey Neil,
Yes,
can I jump in?
Oh, go on.
And hi folks, I'm Nick Hopkins. I'm the news lab lead at Google in Australia and New Zealand. So thanks everyone for coming along. It's great to see you all. My background before I joined Google was at News Corp for a long time in digital. And I remember when we launched the paywall at the Australian a long time ago, and this was a really classic question. It's such a good question. I once went to the Wall Street Journal when we were sort of exploring the idea of paywalls in Australia. And the great lesson I learned from the journal was that your most popular story isn't your most valuable story. And the insight there is that the value lies in getting a subscription, because this, the lifetime value of a subscriber is far higher than the single value of somebody coming and looking at a story. And often, a story that generates a few subscribers, even if the traffic is very low, is way more valuable than a story that attracts, thousands of viewers. And those two things don't directly correlate at all. Stories that generate a lot of clicks don't necessarily result in a large number of subscribers. They can often be very different, which is why you need to have a really clear understanding of what your goal is as a publisher. Do you want to drive a lot of traffic, or do you want to drive a lot of subscribers? Because if it's one or the other, you can't. It's hard to do both sometimes, and you're lucky if you can. But it's such a great question, and it's probably one of the biggest challenges that I think face publishers these days.
That's an amazing question. Thanks, both of you guys. Great to have such deep expertise, in the chat. As you can see, Nick, just by appearing, has made me deeply nervous. Are there any other?
Got one more, and Sue's also got a question. I'm going to put them in your little chat there, Neil.
Great, thank you so much. So the question from Carlson is, do you have any advice for publishers who are conflicted between a page views or a subscription strategy? Look, I'll have a stab at this before I kind of open it up. I think you have to have an audience strategy, and I think that involves both a tactical play on page views and also a tactical play on subscriptions. And by what I mean by that is basically just sort of deeply understanding your audience and who they are and why they're coming, and then using your analytics basically to write more of the stories that are going to drive high page views, because if you're running ads or something like that, that's really important revenue source for you. But also sort of understanding the stories that are driving subscriptions, and that's kind of the example I gave from News Corp in South Australia. Miguel's jumping out the window. I don't know what's happening. But the example I gave from News Corp in South Australia, where they basically understood that development stories in SA were driving a heap of subscriptions, so let's put a journalist on it. So that's kind of my take. I think you need to have an audience strategy that has a tactical play on page views and a tactical play on subs. Does anyone want to pick that up? We'll get Carlos to quickly mute his mic if we can. Unless you want to ask a question, Carlos, up to you. Yeah. Answer that. Does anybody else have a view on that?
You've got a. Oh, actually, sorry, no.
Miguel, were you leaning into that, or?
I was leaning well and truly away from it. I was just trying to. There was a couple more questions, but I'm leaving that point in the air. Although somebody is following up, I think, if you have a look at the chat.
All right, cool. I'm going to just jump over to the chat as well, because I think there's some good questions there. I hope, Carlson, I hope I did you justice there in answering that question. If not, drop me an email and I'll happily go through that in a bit more detail.
See,
Molly, thank you. Thank you. Molly, thank you for the feedback on real-time content insights. It is much nicer than Google Analytics real-time, that is for sure. So Sue Stevenson, who's a very accomplished journalist and is also a lecturer at UTS, has asked a question as well. Does that mean that there is value in investing in immersive long-form stories? Again, I will have a crack at this. I think what we saw at News Corp and what I've seen, I guess, across the course of my career is that users that are spending more time on your websites will return to you more often and are more likely to pay for your journalism. So yeah, I think investing in immersive long-form stories is important if it's going to keep them on the page and it's going to keep them coming back. So doing long-form series is a great idea. So yeah, I absolutely see value in that. Does anybody else have a take on that, the importance of long form? Anyone doing long form?
Neil, I have a take. I don't know if it's worthwhile, but I think, Sue, it's a great question, and hi, it's great to see you. I think with long form, there's always the question of the time and effort required to create a really good, high quality, immersive long form piece. And that can take an enormous amount of time and person, hours, if you like. And sometimes they can work and sometimes they don't necessarily work. But it all comes down to what your content strategy is, whether you want, if you're a high turnover publisher that's seeking, that's sort of breaking news, or if you're kind of a lean back kind of publisher that's doing, slower cadence kind of publishing, and ultimately that's an audience-led question. So you should be responsive to the audience. What does the audience tell you through the data and through the analytics? It's a great question to ask through the lens of analytics, because if you're publishing, I mean look at the engagement rates, look at the conversion rates. If you're driving subscribers, look at the signals that they can tell you through your analytics platform, and be responsive to that. You might find very quickly that the cost and effort required to do long form pieces is more than it's worth, and you should just stick to doing really simple, straightforward reporting. Or you might find that there's a really high conversion rate or really high interest rate.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. And hi to you too. I was just really interested in what Rama said about intent, because I know I've got two preferred news sites. One is where I go for breaking news, and the other is where I go to read. And the one where I go to read long form, I have a subscription on. So it was interesting to see that articulated. And I wonder whether, again, it's that time, resources, value proposition, I guess.
And that also is as much to do with your business model as well. It's hard to do high volume, high traffic, long form reporting with, unless you've got a newsroom the size of the New York Times. But if you're doing subscriptions and you're doing a few of those pieces a week and they're generating a lot of subs, then obviously that potentially can work.
That's great. Thank you, guys.
There's also a plug to subscribe to the Oz from Rama in the chat, which is great hustle. And Carlson has just also dropped in there and said that their long form content converts page views into subscribers at 10 to 50 times a better rate than short form.
Wow.
Wow. That's amazing.
But it also speaks to needing more experienced journalists as well, doesn't it? Because they tend to be the ones doing investigations and long form. Yeah, definitely. And it also, requires the time, doesn't it? You've got to make sure that you're carving out time to do long form, which just, is an investment. And, it's harder and harder to do. That's for sure. David Van Coller, who's just joined Google, he was head of audience at News Corp, has just dropped some info on how Google ranks news content here, which I'm really appreciative of, because I'm sure there was going to be a question at some point about Google search ranking. So thanks, Dave. Are there any other questions?
There's a couple in the chat that I've sent you a couple from Carlson, actually. One about advice for publishers. Oh, actually, maybe you tackled that one. And then there was the approach to subject and measurement tools like Nielsen. Did you see that one?
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's a good one. Carlson, on fire today. Let me just read that one out just so that everybody can see what we're referring to.
He's kind of shy.
But
he's got some killer questions.
Oh, he's an assassin in the chat. How would you approach the subject of measurement tools like Nielsen, which rank publishers on page views / audience, and how that drives KPIs in newsrooms? I don't know how to approach that. Page views. Yeah, look, it's a pretty blunt instrument, isn't it? Like page views is a very blunt instrument, and I actually meant Nielsen as a blunt instrument, but I retract that statement. Yeah, page views is obviously just one thing to look at, but you know, in my experience, it's a good one. If you're going to kind of look at one thing, it's a good one, but obviously, you know, more importantly now, I think publishers are starting to look at things like time on site as being the most important thing, as opposed to just looking at a raw metric like, you know, like page views. Dave, are you still in the chat? Is it worth kind of pulling you in at this point for a more nuanced answer? David Van Coller?
Regarding Nielsen?
Just basically looking at whether page views is a kind of like a misleading thing to look at as just a kind of like a one stat.
Yeah, I think so. I imagine that we've got a mix of brands in the call today. Some you know, are free news sites, others are behind a metered or a hard paywall. So it is a metric, but it's probably one of quite a selection that you should be looking at. I think that what the industry is trying to do is evolve towards metrics that give a greater picture of engagement, right? So engagement means the longer someone spends on your site, the more ads they view, or the more likely they are to maybe subscribe. So I think you probably want to decide for you, based on your content and based on who your targeted audiences are, what is the bundle of metrics that you care about, and how do you compare against your competitive set for those metrics, and then try and put a plan in place to evolve and improve those KPIs.
Thanks, mate. That's a really great answer. And I think what I was trying to get to when we just did that that little exercise at the start of writing down one metric is sometimes just having that sort of like that North Star is really, really powerful. And that's kind of what I did at Storeful when we were first starting to launch the business. I just was like, what is the most important thing to us that's going to really allow us to drive success across a variety of you know, parts of what we're doing? And that thing was just blunt, like users. Let's just get as many users as I can, and that will increase my engagement. That'll increase the number of stories that they're downloading. It'll increase requests to my newsroom, and it will deepen my engagement with the business. And that was kind of it. So, you know, page views or just setting one goal it can be powerful, I think, at times. But yeah, I do take your point. When you're sort of trying to find one standard across an industry like news, it's quite difficult. And they're certainly, as David said, they're starting to think a lot about this now. All right, I'll take another question from.
There's a question from Molly, which I've just sent you, Neil.
Thank you, sir. Got a few little tabs open here. I see News Consumer Insights. Google is defining a brand lover as somebody who had at least 15 visits or more. Do you know where that number is plucked from? We are always changing / questioning how we define a diehard conversion fan / brand lover. Nick, can I throw you under the bus here? Do you? That was a no. Do you know?
That's fine.
Okay, great. Do you know where we're getting that number of 15 visits from in defining what is a brand lover inside?
No, the short answer is I don't know exactly where that comes from. It may be an arbitrary number that reflects, a high degree of return usage. There may be, there's probably more science behind it than that. And so the only thing I would say is that this is a bit of an opportunity then to plug an upcoming deeper dive into real-time content insights and news consumer insights by one of the global product leads on that product, a guy called Antal Diaz, who has kindly offered to give us some time, probably in a few weeks' time, to really deep dive and sort of explain how those two tools work. So if anyone wants to do a deeper dive on that, we'll send around some information. You can join us.
I will be doing that one so that I can answer that question in the future. Thank you so much, Nick. All right, I think we have a few more questions, so I'm going to just kind of flip back and forwards between the Q&A and also the chat which has been used. And see what we have going. So,
looks like we're okay.
Sorry?
To the end of the questions. I'm not sure about the group chat. I'm not sure if anybody.
I've got one in here from Scott Wright. Scott, I hope you're still on the call. I was interested in bigger data journalism stories. Does the new tool allow insights on this, e.g. it might have word count as a proxy or image count? Might have word count. Scott, are you still on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, mate.
I was just thinking, well, the word count was more for the long form. I guess my question was, how do you know it's a long form story? I'm an academic, right? So I don't look at this stuff. So I've never really seen it other than on my own website. So yeah, I guess when where Sue's question was about long form stories, that's okay if you've got that granular detail of it over what every story is. So does it give you a proxy to tell you these are the long form stories? And my main question was about the data journalism, but can we separate out different kinds of stories? And then the broader question was, does data journalism, do data journalism stories perform well in this those questions about conversions? And because I've been speaking to data journalists in Australia, in China, and different places, and get very different answers.
Yeah, look, that's a very, very good question. Just in terms of, I guess, the use of data journalism within the tools that I've mentioned today, those tools are more around, I guess, audience measurement and understanding content. We do have Google Trends, which allows you to understand search data, which is really powerful as well. And we also have a training fellow who's focused on that area as well. So if you were ever interested in doing some trends data analysis, then we could absolutely connect you with her. She's amazing. Look, in terms of, look, I feel like Sue's got a great answer to this. I'm currently teaching multimedia journalism at UTS, and we are looking at long form this semester. And I will get Sue to jump in a second, but look, the way that we think about long form journalism is not necessarily by word count. It's like almost by experience, as esoteric as that sounds. So a good example of that would be something like Snowfall, which was kind of the beginning of the next wave of multimedia journalism, the second wave of multimedia journalism. So John Branch from the New York Times covering an avalanche and no one cared about. And then he just turned it into this beautiful website, which was just so deeply engaging. And if you pulled out the text involved in that story, like I don't know that it would go to 500 words. So I don't know that we'd necessarily, call it long form journalism. But yeah, when I think about long form journalism, I more think about something that's going to deeply engage as opposed to something that's just like 5,000 words, for instance. I hope that answers your question.
Just to jump in, from an analytics point of view, again, since we're talking about it through the lens of the audience behavior, you can set tags on your pages that will show you, that record when somebody scrolls down to a certain point on a page. So you can see whether or not somebody is scrolling down to, you know, halfway down through a story page or to the very, very bottom. You can get a sense of how long they spend on a page, not just in terms of the session duration, but also how deeply they go onto that page to get a sense of whether or not that's sort of yielding proper engagement. So like all analytics tools will let you do that, but definitely Google Analytics will let you do that. And you can create those tags to really understand whether or not, you know, dropping a data visualization halfway down a story ensures that people go that far and then go beyond that. It's not just about checking those kind of basic, you know, session duration or page duration metrics.
Nick and Neil, I just mentioned that I'm actually starting to set assignments in terms of how long it takes, not just to read, but to process all the information in the story. Because, I mean, we're starting to see a lot more news organisations actually put this is an 8-minute read, this is a 10-minute read, because of the commute. And, you know, people need to know before they start or engage in a story how long it's going to take them. But I'm also finding that because everything is mobile optimised, or meant to be, you also measure where in the story it takes longer for an element to load. And that tends to be where you lose your audience as well, particularly in a multi-platform story. So being able to see where they read down to is actually really, really handy.
Yeah, I for one would like to see time to read on every single thing on the internet. It's like my favorite feature. So good, and I think that's really insightful, Sue. Thank you so much for adding that. Look, we're gonna start to wrap up because we're just about to hit time. There's some really interesting links that have started to drop in to the chat as well. So Nick's dropped in Snowfall, which is the project that I mentioned. Carlson's also dropped in a story that they recently did, which was a list of the top 50 schools in WA. Sorry, using some data and analysis and sort of just really packaging that in a super kind of sexy and engaging way. Look, that's about it, guys. Thanks so much for your time. I know how hard it is to sort of eke out an hour in your day. As I mentioned, there's an email in your inbox right now, which is a survey for this session. Please be honest and tell us how we went. There's also the option to sign up at the end to get notifications on more sessions like this. So please do that if you are interested. I'll also send around the full deck, video of this session, and a glossary of terms so that you've got access to all that sort of stuff. Thank you again for your time, and I hope it was useful.